This is the Zelda Game Club, where we play through Legend of Zelda games together. Well, today is part 1 of A Link to the Past. And over the past week, we've been playing through A Link to the Past, and today I'm going to bring you my thoughts on the game so far, plus highlight some of the comments from the Triforce Times community. Well, before we get stuck into today's video, it's not too late to join the latest Zelda Game Club for A Link to the Past. Over the next 7 days, we're going to be playing through until the end of Gargoyle's Domain, which is right before the Ice Palace. That includes Hyrule Castle, Dark Palace, Swamp Palace, Skull Woods, and also Gargoyle's Domain. So if you want to join the Zelda Game Club, then now's a great time to do so, and replay one of the best Zelda games in the series. Well, this is the Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and I think this is where my love for the Zelda franchise was definitely cemented. Well, it's a huge step up from the original games on the NES, the graphics, the audio, the gameplay, all combined. It is an absolutely fantastic package, and it stood the test of time and still plays really well today. Well, without further delay, let's dive right into things. So I want to kick off with a comment from the community, and this one comes from Master Knight DH. And Master Knight says, I find that A Link to the Past is best looked at as a pioneer, but in that regard, if you play it under that mindset, it's definitely overall solid and even manages some surprising game design points. Although one I can particularly think of involves a later item, so spoilers with that. Yeah, A Link to the Past is so much better polished than the NES Zeldas, both of which had issues with their gameplay design in general. Adventure of Link bugging me, but more about that with arguably less excuse. It even shows in the overworld design, which I didn't even think about until I made my more sophisticated comment. Well, first of all, thank you to Master Knight DH for writing in the comments, and we're going to hear more later on from Master Knight DH. So I have to agree with a lot of what Master Knight DH is saying here. This game is still very solid 30 years after the game was originally released. Now, having played through The Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link this year, this game is so much more fluid and just overall better than both of those games. While the original Zelda game on the NES is very good, it's very difficult if you don't know what to do or where to go, as there is very little in the way of guidance to do anything, and without a guide it is close to impossible. So the Adventure of Link has its own troubles, changing up so much of what the formula in The Legend of Zelda is. Link to the Past, I think, takes the best parts from both those games, combines them, and then improves on the formula by a very large margin. Well, thank you to Master Knight DH for that first comment, but let's dive right into the game now. So we start out with Link asleep in bed. It's a stormy night, and Zelda visits Link in his dreams, saying she's trapped in the castle. The evil wizard Agar Nim is trying to open the 7 Wise Men's seal, and the other girls he's kidnapped have disappeared. So Link then jumps out of bed, grabs his lamp from the chest and goes outside into the rain and the darkness to follow the clue. So the idea then is to follow the path to Hyrule Castle. You can't get in the front way, the knights aren't going to let you in, so you have to go around the back and find that secret entrance under the bushes. And once you find your way into the castle, you're then given your first sword and shield, and then you're just simply plunged right into the adventure. Well, first up, we've got saving Zelda. So the castle is relatively straightforward. Start out in the sewers, you fight against rats, and you also come across magic to fill up your magic meter, which allows you to use the lamp found in your house earlier. Link makes his way through the sewers and into Hyrule Castle, and we get our first taste of dungeons in A Link to the Past. This introduces us to a couple of core mechanics and core concepts for the game, and also the Legend of Zelda series as a whole. So we can find a map to help us navigate around the castle, plus we have a specialist item, and that is the boomerang. That allows us to stun enemies and also pick up items from a distance. Now, it's not long before we find Princess Zelda, although she is guarded by a mini-boss. He's not too tricky, he's a mace-wielding knight. You can use the boomerang that you found in the castle to stun him in place, and then use the sword to finish him off. So we then make our way out of the throne room with Princess Zelda following, and it is kind of an escort mission. Behind the decadent chairs is a bookcase. We have to push it to one side and use it as an escape route from Hyrule Castle to get back to the sanctuary. Link and Zelda then battle their way through more sewers, and then meet up with the High Priest in the sanctuary. Zelda is saved, well, at least for now, and they both warn Hyrule falling into the hands of that evil wizard. Yeah, in terms of opening to video games, it's up there with the best of them. The immediate excitement of being thrown into the action in that rain-soaked night. I love the immediate introduction of secrets and hidden things to find. For example, you got to find that secret way into the castle under the bushes. You've got that hidden door behind the bookcase in the throne room. You're immediately thrown into the combat too, given a sword and a shield, plus an item or two and some magic. It really sets up the rest of the game perfectly well. Well, let's dive over to another comment from a Triforce Times community member, and this one is a familiar community member. This one is BombZeCoffee. So BombZeCoffee says, I've just got the 3 pendants, and I really like the game. It's really nice, it's really colourful, and the music is great. And I really love the dungeons and the puzzles, within it. Sometimes they're hard, but they're great fun, and the first boss is the best by far. The Pegasus boots are good to get around fast, but I keep hitting into a wall. I'd rather I could roll instead. Well, thank you, BombZeCoffee. Great to hear from you again. And BombZeCoffee took part in the first Zelda Game Club with The Adventure of Link, and it's great to see you back once again. Yes, the game is nice and colourful, plus the music I think is great. I really think the game benefited from the upgrade to the SNES, with more memory for graphics and music at the time. I think the game is bursting with personality with the character animations, whether that be Link running or crows swooping down to attack Link, or even the evil wizard, plus you've got the bosses as well. The Pegasus boots are really good. I really like the fact they've got multiple uses, like getting around the overworld. Interesting point about rolling instead of running, so I definitely like the idea of rolling in combat, but I don't think I'd want to give up the running around the overworld. That just saves so much time. Well, next up, let's go back to the game, and we've got the journey to the Eastern Palace. So once you finish the opening act, there is a little exploring to do. So the man in the sanctuary provides a lead for Link, saying you should go and get the Master Sword, and there's a village elder in Kakariko Village who may be able to help you out with the next steps. You have to be careful though, as soldiers are going to be looking for you around every corner. So on your way to Kakariko Village, you do get to play a little bit more with the combat, as there's plenty of knights to fight. Now the combat is very satisfying in A Link to the Past, and a big step up from the NES versions. A Link to the Past goes back to the original top-down style we saw in The Legend of Zelda, but also managed to capture the excellent swordplay from The Adventure of Link. And there's loads more personality in the way Link moves, his head bobbing up and down, when he's walking or he's running, and when he dies he falls flat on his face. The level of charm and personality injected into this game through the animations and music should not be understated. Well, heading on over to Kakariko Village, you've got wanted posters everywhere for Link saying, "This is the criminal who kidnapped Princess Zelda," and a picture of Link's face, so Link does have to be careful. And while Link is searching for the Elder in the village, there also are a few items we can find around, including bottles, which are useful for things like keeping fairies, and also bees as well. So if you haven't tried catching a bee yet, I recommend doing that. You can also come across fairy fountains, another staple of the Legend of Zelda series, as well as find mysterious items like the mushroom in the Lost Woods. That can be given to the witch in exchange for some magic dust. That can be sprinkled on things to change them. And again, there's really interesting items in the game which amazed me when I was a kid, related to the size and the scope of the map. It also demonstrates how influential this game was with regards to the games that are still coming out today. There's plenty of top-down action RPGs. A Link to the Past can still compete with the best of them. After a little bit of overworld exploration and speaking to Sahasrahala's wife and grandson in the village, you're directed toward the east and Sahasrahala's location in the Eastern Palace. So Sahasrahala will tell you about the Master Sword, but it's not as simple as just picking it up out of the ground. You're going to need the 3 pendants to even hold the Master Sword. Well, first of all then, we've got the Eastern Palace, so with that information in mind, we head to the Eastern Palace, which is the location for the first pendant. Here we are introduced to the switching mechanic, switches underneath the pots. Then you've got Stalfos make their return to the series, having appeared in both previous Zelda games. This dungeon doesn't really provide much in the way of a challenge, but it's good to reaffirm the game mechanics, like finding the map, the compass, the dungeon item, and also the big key. Little keys can be found throughout the game, and they are needed to progress. Normally, little keys can be found by killing all the enemies in a single room or in chests. The dungeon item here in the Eastern Palace is the bow, which is very, very useful for ranged attacks. Also, you've got some new enemies introduced in this dungeon, the Igors. They're basically ogres with a single eye. They act like statues until you get close to them, then they come alive and start making their way towards you. Now, it's not long until you find the boss room in this dungeon, which is filled with 6 Armos Knights. Now, the bow comes in very handy here, and once you've defeated the boss, you get that first pendant. That is the Pendant of Courage, and a whole heart upgrade too, meaning you're going to have more health overall. Well, let's dive into a community comment from Eden8. So thank you, Eden8, for writing in, and Eden8 says, I'm happy to see this video has found its way into my recommended feed. Now, I've been playing this game as part of Randomisers recently, but casually, it's an entirely different experience. The light world, some interesting parts of exploration to it, and I remember when I first played the game, I don't think I got the mushroom item or the ice rod until I was doing dark world things. I also really like the progression chain order of major items, and it doesn't feel too punishing. I'll save my full thoughts until part 2 though. The light world is a nice introduction to the game, and it's a bit like the calm before the storm, for me. Well, I really like the calm before the storm comment there from Eden8, that definitely rings true. So thank you to Eden8 for playing along. It's great to hear that you've been playing through Randomisers. I'd really love to hear from you about more about that, in terms of how it mixes up the game, and even explain to the layperson what a Zelda randomizer is, and how people can get involved. It's been on my to-do list for some time. I would love to get into the Zelda randomizer scene, so it's funny to hear it's much more of a casual experience when it's played as intended. I can't imagine that the items or the other things being randomized, that must be so tough. But thank you, Eden8, for commenting. I really hope we hear more from you and your experience in part 2 of this Zelda Game Club. Well, next up we got the journey to the Desert Palace. So once you've finished up the first dungeon, Link makes his way back to speak to Sahasrahala. He'll then give you the Pegasus boots, which makes it even easier to travel around Hyrule. Plus you can run into cracked walls and open them up as an alternative to bombs, or you can knock things off shelves. From this point you have to make your way to the Desert Palace, where we've got a few items marked on our overworld map. So we've got the remaining pendants and the Master Sword, which lays dormant in the Lost Woods. Before though, heading to the Desert Palace, it is necessary to go back to Kakariko Village and get the Book of Maduro. The building you're looking for is a book marked with a feather above the main door. When you go into the building, you can see the book on top of a shelf, so Link then has to use the Pegasus boots to run fast into the bookshelf and knock down that book. The Book of Maduro is used to read Hylian in this world, and it's really, really important for getting into the Desert Palace. There's also a few other items you can pick up at this point at the Great Swamp, so this is an area in the southern part of the map, and here you can find the Swamp Ruins, so enter the Swamp Ruins and drain the swamp by using the pulley in the wall, and then you'll find a heart piece. There's also a hidden fairy fountain where you can find the ice rod. Now, the most important thing though is the Book of Maduro, and once you've got this, you want to make your way to the Desert Palace. Now, once you've gone through the desert, you'll find a tablet at the entrance of the Desert Palace. Then there you've got some text in Hylian. So get out the Book of Maduro and use that item in front of the tablet. Then you'll be able to read the text that simply states, wish the door open, and your wish will be granted. Link does this, and the stone blocks move, and you're able to enter the Desert Palace. Well, next up then, we've got the Desert Palace. So it's covered in sand, and many enemies in this dungeon come up out of the ground. So we've got new enemies that are introduced in this palace too, with Beamos and flying tiles making an appearance. Much like the previous castle, it doesn't really provide too much difficulty. The map, the compass, and the big key are relatively easy to find. This leads us to the Power Glove, which allows us to pick up the heavy stones Link wasn't able to pick up before. The slightly confusing element here for me was you have to leave the Desert Palace from a southwestern entrance and then find another entrance to the north. I was wandering around a lot trying to find out where to go, and then it all clicks into place. When you see the rocks, and before long you have to face off against the boss, and this time it's a huge sandworm called Lanmola. The idea is to hit the boss in the head when he's up and out of the ground. You've got 3 variants to begin with, and you have to whittle them down until you defeat them all. It's a good idea to have a fairy in a bottle, just in case you get into a tricky situation and die, and then you can immediately get resurrected. Kill the boss, get the heart container, and also, here, you've got the Pendant of Power. Well, let's go back over to a Triforce Times community comment. And this one is from BombZeCoffee once again. BombZeCoffee says, I do like how we have bottles for potions in this game, and we can use it to put fairies in too. Now, I don't really like to rewind since it feels like I'm cheating, and the Stalfos and the soldiers can really hurt you, so I use potions and fairies to help and not rewind so much. Well, good tips there from BombZeCoffee. That's a really good point. Having fairies means less rewinding, especially when comparing it to The Adventure of Link. The latter parts of that game was a real tough ride. Storing fairies in a bottle is a great mechanic. I often forgot I did it, only to be woken up when I died against a boss. Very useful indeed. Well, next up we got the journey to the Tower of Hera, and this includes one of my favourite moments in the game so far. So we got 2 out of 3 pendants at this point, and next it's time to get the third and final one. Now, it's a dangerous journey as we have to travel through the caves of Death Mountain, and given we just got the Power Glove, that means we can grab another useful item for traversing the overworld, and that is Zora's Flippers. So to get these, you have to make your way back to Link's house and then go past the Witch's house, where we traded the mushroom earlier, and then you want to follow the river. So Link can walk in the shallow parts. It's simply a matter of making your way to the end and the waterfall to speak to King Zora. He's going to sell you the flippers for 500 rupees, which is a steep price, but it is worth it given the traversal and also the ability to fast travel through the portals found in the rivers. There's also another point of interest before heading to Death Mountain, and there's a secret behind a waterfall. So after you speak to King Zora, you want to go through the whirlpool and behind the waterfall, and you'll find the mysterious pond. So throw items into the pond and you're going to get upgrades. For example, if you throw your boomerang in, you'll get the magic boomerang in return. That goes further, that's really good. Or you can throw in your shield and you're going to get a fire-resistant shield back. Well, at this point, it's time to head towards Death Mountain. So behind the sanctuary, make your way up to the entrance and use the Power Glove to remove the big rocks that get in your way. In the caves, you're going to meet an old man who's willing to help you to get to the top of Death Mountain. So help that old man and he'll give you the magic mirror in return for helping him. This is a super important item. It's not totally clear as to why just yet, but it's all going to become clear very soon. So keep making your way to the top of Death Mountain and you're going to find that blue portal. So enter the blue portal, then the whole world changes and shifts. All of a sudden, you're dressed up like a bunny, you've got no sword and no shield, everything is very strange. The music and the tone, all the graphics shifts and changes at the same time. It's enough to send shivers down my spine just remembering that moment. I absolutely love it. This is the dark world, the hidden world inside of Hyrule, and the magic mirror, which was just given to us by the old man, is the key to escaping the dark world for now. Therefore, you want to use it and make your way north and then a little bit east to the Tower of Hera. Okay, so we're in the Tower of Hera. So this is our final dungeon for this part of the game club and the place where we get our final pendant. A new mechanic is introduced as soon as we get into the palace, and that is the red and the blue switches. So hitting a switch toggles between the red and the blue blocks raising up out of the ground, which makes for an interesting set of puzzles in this dungeon. This would continue in other Zelda games like Link's Awakening, and also into the 3D Zelda games too. The red and the blue switches make for a slightly more tricky palace, although it's not something that should be a blocker. Once again, we've got to find a map, a compass, and a big key, and the item here in this palace is called the Moon Pearl, which is going to help us when we go to the Dark World in the future. The boss is slightly more difficult in this dungeon. You have to hit his tail, and he speeds up and gets faster and faster, making him quite difficult to hit. Plus, Link gets knocked off the edges and down to the floors below. Trying to stop Link from getting knocked down is probably more difficult than beating the boss itself, but before long, you're going to defeat the boss, and now, finally, you've got all 3 pendants. Let's go back to the Triforce Times community and speak to Master Knight DH, who makes a good comment about the combat and the gameplay. Let's not forget about the sword combat that adds the spin attack, which is first off a charge-up attack, a game design topic that already piques my interest as of late, and more importantly the spin attack that gives players added options, including of course the deterrent attack in the core gameplay. And then you've got the level design, such as the Eastern Palace, having a room where the anti-fairies mess with the player's ability to move anti-clockwise and switch toggles for effectively every resulting loop through a room as a result. Or you've got the camouflage key in the Desert Palace being near the telepathy tile, or especially the ports with the hearts right before Moldorm exceeding the player's possible number of heart containers at that point. So while there are still some things that bug me already, and there's more to come, I can say A Link to the Past does quite nicely as far as an early 90s game goes, and I can't wait to provide further input on what is working, even if I have to call out what isn't. Well, it's a really nicely balanced comment there. So the sword combat, I think I agree with you, is really, really good in the game. The introduction of the spin and the charge up is very, very nice. So I played through Tunic earlier on in the year, which you can draw a comparison to A Link to the Past, although playing through A Link to the Past once again here for this playthrough, I really, really think it's hard to beat the Legend of Zelda Adventure here in terms of the game feel. I definitely noticed the pots before Moldorm, so a good move there from Nintendo to cushion the blow a little for that boss fight. I was lucky enough to have a couple of fairies in bottles by that point, but the hearts in the pots do demonstrate decent game design. I didn't really notice that there was more than my current heart meter could sustain, but I did notice if you tried to pick up the hearts multiple times, it wouldn't let you. It's kind of like a one-time deal, so maybe it's supposed to help you over multiple fights for that boss. Well, thank you once again, Master Knight DH, and really, really looking forward to more of your comments in part 2 of this Zelda Game Club. Well, next up, it is time to get the Master Sword, but we're going to have to leave that for A Link to the Past Part 2. Well, so far, I've really enjoyed what I've played of A Link to the Past. It's been really good. So it has been a real good while since I played this as a kid. I couldn't really remember the sequence of things, but it's very easy to get around. Markers are placed on your map, and your hand is being held in terms of where to go. The game is filled with personality and charm, so much more so than the first two Zelda games on the NES. A Link to the Past takes everything that was great from the first game, adds a layer of help for the player, plus you've got the music and the graphics really dial the game up to 10. Then you got that moment where you enter the Dark World and everything gets flipped on its head. You're standing there as Link looking like a bunny and you're like, what is going on? This may be an old game, but it still has the power to surprise and shock. It is absolutely fantastic. Well, in terms of the gameplay for Part 1, that is it. It's done. For Part 2, let's play through until the end of Gargoyle's Domain. So that includes Hyrule Castle, the Dark Palace, Swamp Palace, Skull Woods and Gargoyle's Domain. That's slightly more than we had to do in Part 1, but we do have some momentum right now. So play through and comment on this video what you think of the game so far, and get your comments to me by Monday the 17th of October, and I'll put together the Part 2 video, and I'll release it on Tuesday the 18th of October. So it's not too late to start up the Zelda Game Club for A Link to the Past. If you haven't started yet, don't worry, you can still catch up. Also, I noticed a lot of A Link to the Past speedrunners or randomizer players commenting on the Zelda Game Club. First of all, thank you so much for commenting. Your insight is really, really super valuable, and it's really great that you're playing along, and I'm really happy to hear from everyone, whether you're playing along with the Triforce Times community as part of this Zelda Game Club, or you're playing it at your own pace. However, if you want your comments to be included in Part 2, then get your comments to me on this video by Monday the 17th of October. Well, before we go today, let's have a look at some of the interesting facts about A Link to the Past. So, development first started in 1988 on a new Zelda project. Originally, it was on NES hardware, but it was quickly ported to the Super Nintendo. Originally, Shigeru Miyamoto intended to have the game include a party mechanic similar to Final Fantasy, so there were plans for a half-elf, a human, a magic user and a girl, but that was scaled back to only include Link in the end. So most NES games at the time were only 4 megabytes, but this was 8 megabytes, and that allowed Nintendo to create a large world for Link to explore, packed full of secrets. The developers also saved space by creating very similar light and dark worlds in terms of layout, but they used different textures to give it that different feel. So some features were also cut due to space and also time. For example, the ability to create wildfires in the overworld, and a feature that would eventually return in other Zelda games. Well, there is a really interesting Easter egg in the game, which was a prize from Nintendo Power. So back in 1990, they asked players to take a photo of a rare and powerful enemy found in Final Fantasy, and then send it in. Nintendo then chose a winner at random and their name was put into the game. So there's a hidden room in A Link to the Past which has 45 rupees and a greeting from Chris Houlihan, the winner of the contest. So when you find the hidden room, the thief says, "My name is Chris Houlihan, this is my top secret room, keep it between us, okay?" So that is really a nice touch from Nintendo, but I can't imagine them doing something like that today. Now, the room was intended as a crash prevention measure, so the game would send players to this room if it couldn't determine where Link was going when he had to go to another area, and it's been found through 5 different methods. So there was no wide awareness of the room until the 2000s, more than a decade after the release of A Link to the Past, with an increase of the popularity of the internet and also Super Nintendo emulators. Then you had the Game Boy Advance re-release, so the Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past and 4 Swords. Well, that removed the ability to access the room, although it still could be found in the game's code. The Virtual Console re-release on the Wii, the Wii U and the new Nintendo 3DS, as well as the version present on Nintendo Switch Online, contain the room, being emulations of the original game. Well, next up we've got the reception. So the game was an absolute hit when it was released. It topped the charts in Japan when it was released in November and December 1991, and also then as well in January 1992, and it was the best-selling 1991 release. It was the 3rd best-selling game of 1992 in North America after Street Fighter II and Sonic 2, and it sold 1 million units. A Link to the Past spent 5 years at number 1 in Nintendo Power's list of top games, and worldwide it is the best-selling SNES game, with 4.61 million copies sold on the SNES and 2.8 million copies sold on the Game Boy Advance, although that only goes up to 2004. Well, I've got some final thoughts on A Link to the Past Part 1, so that is it for the first part of the Zelda Game Club for A Link to the Past. Part 2 is going to be out in a week's time, so please get your comments to me by Monday, the 17th of October, to be included in Part 2. It'd be great if you could complete everything up to Gargoyle's Domain, that is Hyrule Castle. So that is everything we've played through in Part 1 so far, plus Part 2, which is Hyrule Castle, Dark Palace, Swamp Palace, Skull Woods, and Gargoyle's Domain. So reach that point, then stop, and we're going to complete the game together the week after. If you haven't started yet, don't worry, there's still time. The game is about 15 hours long, so it is possible to catch up. And it'd be great for as many people as possible in the Triforce Times community to play along and comment on this video. Finally, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who commented and who was playing along. It's really appreciated, and I'm really glad you enjoy the videos and you are part of the Triforce Times community. Well, thanks again, enjoy playing through Part 2, and I'll see you very soon.